Stockton-on-Tees Borough Council Pan-Disability Awareness Session for Licensed Drivers. Brought to you by STEPS clients and Jigsaw Theatre Training Group. Transport is often an issue, undermining people's confidence leaving their homes, stopping them getting out to meet friends and use local services. We want to make transport more accessible to people with disabilities and their carers so they have the confidence to travel and live a full life. The following video will give drivers an opportunity to hear from passengers and think about the small things that you can do to make a difference to people living with a disability in your community. Denise, registered blind, totally blind.
Right, the first thing I'd like to say is that when a taxi driver, whether he's old or new, and he goes out to pick a disabled person up, for him not to assume that they don't need any help or just to sit in the cab and expect them to come out. They should treat them as an individual person and sort of put the emphasis onto the individual person. How can they help them to get to the taxi, get in and do the journey with success? For myself, I can only really speak for visually impaired people, and that I've got a guide dog and not all taxis accept them, even though they should by law, especially when they see the size of my dog. It's a bit concerning. I have on arrangements with the taxi firm that they send me an estate car so my dog can go in the back, but majority of times when they send me a car out, it's a small Skoda, and the dog has to end up sitting in the front welt with me. He's very good, he can tuck in, but I'd rather have an estate car. And it's quite off-putting. I know it can't be helped that the dog shreds his hairs with him being a Labrador, and that once I get out, I've known a taxi driver actually take the mat out. I know they've got to for other customers, but to do it as soon as I step out, start brushing it, it's a little off-putting. They could wait till I've walked away and then do it, and then it's not so obvious. Also, when booking a taxi, I always ask what fare is going to be, so I've got an accurate amount. And I have known in the past that once I've got to my destination, the drivers tried to charge me more money, so I've politely asked him to get in touch with control so they can confirm how much they gave to me to pay. Also, being visually impaired, when a taxi pulls up, the driver often sits in the cab. Now, if he's got the information that the person's visually impaired, they should make an effort to go to the door and let them know it's there. I've actually known a taxi come for me outside, hasn't let me know one way or the other is there, waited for a allocated time and then gone. And I'm sat waiting, and it's quite annoying. I have one particular driver, he's absolutely brilliant. I've had him for a long time and he's used to me now and the dog, and of course he has an estate car. He actually puts the dog in the back, then takes me round to the front passenger seat, opens the door for me, makes sure I'm in, closes it, and then he chats away to me as we're travelling along to where I'm going. So that's a good point on that. It would be nice if majority of drivers could be like that.
Rebecca, autistic, read by Sherry from Jigsaw Theatre.
I don't travel by taxi as I'm not sure what the social norm is. If the driver could direct me to where I sit, it'd be really helpful. I'm not sure what to talk about, so if the driver could start the conversation, it would be very helpful.
A Steps Client, Registered Blind, read by Emily from Jigsaw Theatre.
I always use the same taxi company, and because I'm registered blind, I find a few things really helpful. So for instance, when they park on my drive, and they knock to let me know they're here, and also if they can guide me to the passenger door because I don't know which way the car is facing. When I get in the car, I can buckle up my seatbelt myself and I can pay without problem. It just might take me a little bit longer than a person with normal sight. When I get to the other end, if there's nobody waiting for me, I really appreciate it if the taxi driver can take me into the venue. These things really help with my independence. When I book a taxi, I always tell the office that I'm registered blind and of the support that I need. But lately they've been having some issues because the message doesn't seem to be getting through. For instance, some of the taxis might park 3 doors away from my house, or they might not turn up at all, and then that makes me feel really vulnerable and anxious if I'm like going home late on a night out or something.
David, Learning Disabled, read by Jo from Jigsaw Theatre.
I don't mind travelling by taxi. I know where I'm going. Otherwise I can feel quite anxious. A taxi driver asks me about my day. It helps me to relax. I always intend to use the same company, so my rides have a set price, which means I can have my money ready in advance. I felt uncomfortable, and the driver requested money before the journey. This was different to my routine. I questioned why, and he said it's because it's been conned and now wants payment up front. He explained how I wouldn't do that and that I wanted to pay at the end. The driver refused to move without payment, and that made me feel vulnerable, threatened, and that I had no option.
Eve, Learning Disabled, read by Emily from Jigsaw Theatre.
So I book a lot of my taxis through the app because I stutter when I'm nervous and sometimes I struggle to explain where I am or where I'm going. So I use the app because I can see who my taxi driver is and what the car looks like. And it's helpful because I just put in like a saved location, like my parents' house or somewhere. There's only a few times that I've had an issue, like sometimes I have had to get into a taxi and because I couldn't explain where I was going, they didn't understand me, and at that point I was in floods of tears. I had to call my mum, she had to calm me down and she had to explain to the taxi driver where I was actually going, and then she stayed on the phone until I arrived at my destination. A few times the taxis have been late, which makes me feel really anxious, but I do like it when the taxi driver initiates a conversation because it makes me feel more relaxed and it passes the time quicker.
John, Learning Disabled, read by Ryan from Jigsaw Theatre.
I always use the same company. They recognise me on the phone when I ring them. They often know my routine. I'm familiar with the places I go regularly. I prefer it when the driver's talkative. This helps me to relax and not feel so anxious.
Scott, Deaf, Visually Impaired and Physically Disabled, read by David from Jigsaw Theatre.
My mum kindly called into the taxi van's office and explained my needs, that I am deaf, that I have a sight impairment, have difficulty with my voice, and have immobility on my left side. The drivers were informed. The phone I used was always very reliable. They know my destination and where to drop me off. I found the app really helpful for ordering taxis. Otherwise, otherwise I will have to rely on others to phone for me. This has given me great control.
Stephen, permanent wheelchair user.
Hi, my name is Stephen. After a couple of years of my progressive illness, I am now permanently in a wheelchair. Regarding wheelchair taxi use, I've used a select few firms that I know for picking me up. They communicate with me. They always make sure they're on time. They make sure they communicate what time they're picking me up so that I know my return is secure. I continue using them because the availability of other firms is sporadic. I've had incidences where I've had a wheelchair breakdown and no one will come out late at night to pick me up. I've also had situations where I'm out for a meal with family, but when I phoned up to get a return, they wouldn't come out, or their phone is switched off. Availability on weekends and evenings as a wheelchair user is very poor, and it needs to change.
Hannah, visual impairment, read by Sherry from Jigsaw Theatre.
I've had mixed experiences with taxis. Sometimes the taxi driver isn't always giving the correct information from the main office, which means errors can happen. As I have poor sight, I was unable to see which way the driver was going, and therefore unaware. Until I reached the venue, I realised it was the wrong place. I therefore put a lot of trust in the driver and now double check the destination when I get in the car to stop this from happening again.
Some final advice from Denise.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to mention, I think that all drivers for taxis should get very frequent training on different disabilities. Not somebody who thinks that they can do the training. I think they should get individual disabilities in to give maybe half an hour, maybe an hour's training, advice, sit there and ask if there's any questions that we could give to them, because not meaning it harshly, we who live with a disability are the experts and we can give the appropriate training and advice.
Thank you for watching.